I came home from my business trip without telling anyone. I found my sick husband in the room, alone and with a fever. But my daughter was in the living room, laughing loudly with her husband. She didn't even care. So I walked right into the middle of their party and made her regret it immediately. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The key turned harder than usual in the lock, as if the house itself was resisting my early return. I had cut my business trip to Portland short by 3 days when Quincy called Tuesday morning, his voice hoarse and weak, telling me he was running a fever and couldn't keep anything down. 64 years old, and I still felt that maternal panic every time someone I loved was sick. I'll be home by tonight, I had promised him over the crackling hotel phone connection. Just rest, honey. Take your medicine. The flight delays at Portland International had been endless. Weather, they said. Mechanical issues, they said. By the time I finally walked through our front door, it was past 9 p.m., and I was exhausted. My small suitcase wheels clicked against the hardwood floor as I pulled it behind me, expecting to find Quincy asleep, and Arden maybe reading in the guest room where she'd been staying to help care for her father. Instead, I heard laughter. Bright, carefree laughter echoing from the living room. I froze in the entryway, my hand still gripping the suitcase handle. The sound was wrong. It was too light, too joyful for a house where someone was supposed to be sick. My stomach tightened with a familiar dread that I couldn't quite name yet. Following the sound, I moved quietly toward the living room. The hardwood creaked under my feet, but the laughter was loud enough to mask my approach. As I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. Arden sat cross-legged on our cream-colored sofa, a wine glass in her hand, her face flushed with amusement. Beside her, her husband Marcus was gesturing wildly, mid-story, clearly entertaining her with whatever tale had them both in hysterics. Empty takeout containers littered our coffee table, along with a half-empty bottle of our good Chardonnay, the one Quincy and I had been saving for our anniversary next month. They looked like they were having the time of their lives. And then, Marcus was saying between chuckles, the guy actually tried to argue with me about the parking ticket, like I'm supposed to care that his wife was in labor. Arden threw her head back and laughed even harder. Oh my God, Marcus, you're terrible. But that's exactly why I married you. I stood there in the doorway, invisible to them, my heart hammering against my ribs. Where was Quincy? Where was my sick husband who couldn't keep food down 12 hours ago? Excuse me, I said, my voice cutting through their merriment like a blade. Both heads snapped toward me, their expressions shifting from joy to surprise to something that looked almost like guilt. Almost. Mom! Arden exclaimed, setting down her wine glass with a sharp clink. You're back early. I thought you weren't coming home until Friday. Quincy's sick, I said slowly, my eyes scanning the mess they'd made of our living room. Remember? That's why I came home. Marcus cleared his throat and stood up, smoothing down his shirt. Hey there, Ethel. How was Portland? I ignored his question. Where is your father, Arden? Something flickered across her face. Annoyance, maybe, or inconvenience. He's sleeping. Has been for hours. The fever broke around dinner time, so we figured we'd grab some food and relax a bit. You know how exhausting it is, taking care of sick people. Taking care of sick people. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at the takeout containers again, counted them. 2. Just 2. My throat felt tight. Did you get him anything to eat? Any medicine? Arden waved her hand dismissively. Mom, he said he wasn't hungry. You can't force someone to eat when they're nauseous. But even as she spoke, I could see it in her eyes. That same look she'd had as a child when she'd been caught in a lie. Defiant, slightly bored, as if my questions were an inconvenience she shouldn't have to endure. I should check on him, I said, already turning toward the hallway. Mom, really, he's fine, Arden called after me. Don't wake him up. He needs his rest. I didn't respond. My feet carried me down the familiar hallway to our bedroom, past family photos that suddenly felt like they belonged to strangers. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open gently. The sight that greeted me made my heart stop. Quincy lay in our bed, still wearing the same pajamas he'd had on when I left 3 days ago. The sheets were tangled around his legs, damp with sweat. His face was flushed and pale at the same time, and even from the doorway, I could see his chest rising and falling too rapidly. On the nightstand sat a glass of water, completely full, untouched. The pill organizer I'd filled before leaving was exactly where I'd left it. Tuesday's compartment still full of his blood pressure medication and vitamins. "Quincy?" I whispered, moving closer to the bed. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Ethel, you're home?" "Yes, honey, I'm home. I pressed my hand to his forehead, and the heat radiating from his skin made me gasp. He was burning up. "When did you last take your temperature?" He tried to sit up but couldn't manage it. Tuesday? Maybe Wednesday morning?" Arden said not to worry about it. "Tuesday. He'd been running a fever for days without monitoring it." "Have you eaten anything today?" Quincy's laugh was weak and bitter. "Arden brought me some crackers this morning. Said that was enough for someone with stomach problems." Crackers. While she and Marcus were downstairs eating Chinese takeout and drinking our anniversary wine. I helped him sit up, supporting his back with pillows. "Let me get you some water. And we need to check your temperature properly." As I moved around our bedroom, gathering the thermometer and fresh water, I could hear Arden and Marcus in the living room. Their voices lower now, but still relaxed, still untroubled. The sound of their casual conversation felt like nails on a chalkboard. When I returned to Quincy's side with the digital thermometer, his temperature read 103.2 degrees. He'd been fighting a serious fever for 3 days while our daughter entertained her husband downstairs. "Ethel," Quincy said quietly, his hand finding mine. "I'm glad you're home." The simple relief in his voice, the way he squeezed my fingers like I was his lifeline, broke something inside me. This man had raised Arden alongside me, had worked double shifts to pay for her college education, had walked her down the aisle at her wedding just 2 years ago. And she had left him alone to suffer while she enjoyed herself 20 feet away. As I helped Quincy sip water and take his overdue medication, I heard Arden's laughter again from the living room. Bright and carefree, without a trace of concern for the man who had given her everything. That sound would haunt me for the rest of my life. I spent the night in the chair beside Quincy's bed, monitoring his fever and making sure he stayed hydrated. Every hour I'd check his temperature, help him to the bathroom, encourage him to take small sips of water or weak broth. By morning, his fever had finally broken, dropping to 99.1 degrees. Arden didn't come to check on him once. Around 7 a.m., I heard her moving around in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling to life. The smell of brewing coffee drifted down the hallway, followed by the clink of dishes and the casual morning sounds of someone who'd had a full night's sleep. I waited until Quincy was resting comfortably before venturing out to face my daughter. I found her sitting at our kitchen table, scrolling through her phone while eating toast with jam. She was wearing one of my robes, my favorite one actually, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked refreshed, relaxed, like someone who'd spent a pleasant evening followed by a peaceful night's sleep. She glanced up when I entered the kitchen. "Morning, Mom. How's Dad doing?" The casual tone, as if she were asking about the weather, made my jaw tighten. "His fever broke a few hours ago. No thanks to anyone else." Arden's eyebrows rose slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" I moved to the sink, needing something to do with my hands. The dishes from her dinner with Marcus were still there, plates with dried sauce, glasses with wine residue, takeout containers that hadn't even made it to the trash. It means I found dirty dishes, empty wine bottles, and a husband who hadn't had his medication in 3 days. She sighed, the sound heavy with exaggerated patience. "Mom, I told you, Dad said he wasn't hungry, and he's perfectly capable of taking his own pills." "Is he?" I turned to face her, my voice sharper than I intended, because when I checked last night, every single pill from Tuesday and Wednesday was still in his organizer. His blood pressure medication, his vitamins, everything. Arden shifted in her chair, her phone forgotten. Well, maybe he forgot. Old people forget things sometimes. Old people. She said it like Quincy was some stranger, not the man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had sat through every single one of her high school drama performances, who had co-signed her first apartment lease when her credit wasn't good enough. He's 66, Arden, not 90, and he's been sick. When someone's running a fever of over 103 degrees, they need help remembering things. Look, Mom, she said, setting down her toast with more force than necessary. I did my best, okay? I'm not a nurse. I don't know everything about taking care of sick people. But you know how to take care of yourself, I thought. You knew how to order dinner for you and Marcus. You knew how to open our good wine. Instead, I said, You've been here since Monday, Arden. That's 3 full days. And it's been exhausting, she shot back. Do you have any idea how stressful it is being responsible for someone else? I barely got any sleep. I looked at her sitting there in my robe, her face unmarked by worry or fatigue, and felt something cold settle in my chest. You barely got any sleep? Dad was restless, kept making noise. Marcus and I could hear him from the guest room. So you heard him, but you didn't check on him? Arden's expression hardened. What was I supposed to do? He's an adult, Mom. If he needed something, he could have asked. He had a fever of over 103 degrees, Arden. People that sick don't always think clearly enough to ask for help. She waved her hand dismissively. You're being dramatic. It's just the flu or something. People get sick all the time. Just the flu. I stared at my daughter. This woman I had carried for 9 months, labored for 18 hours to bring into this world, and tried to find some trace of the compassionate child I thought I'd raised. Did you even take his temperature? Once? A pause. Too long of a pause. I touched his forehead a couple times, she said finally. When? I don't know, Mom. I wasn't keeping a chart or anything, because if you had been keeping track, you would have known that his fever was dangerous, that he was dehydrated, that he needed medical attention. Arden's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it. Marcus is wondering if we should head home today or tomorrow. The casual way she changed the subject, as if we'd been discussing weekend plans instead of her father's health, made my stomach turn. You're leaving? Well, yeah. Dad's better now, right? And you're home. There's no reason for us to stay. No reason to stay. I repeated her words slowly, tasting their bitterness. Your father has been seriously ill for 3 days. And now he's better. Thanks to me watching him while you were off on your business trip. Thanks to her. I almost laughed at the audacity of it. Arden, when I walked in last night, you were drinking wine and laughing with Marcus, while your father lay in bed with a dangerous fever. You hadn't given him his medication, hadn't checked his temperature, hadn't even made sure he was drinking water. Her cheeks flushed slightly, but her voice remained defiant. I was taking a break. Even caregivers need breaks, Mom. A break that lasted 3 days? That's not fair. What's not fair is leaving your sick father alone so you could entertain your husband. Arden stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the kitchen floor. I don't have to listen to this. I came here to help, and this is the thanks I get? You came here to help? The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was past caring. What exactly did you help with? I stayed here. I kept an eye on Dad. I made sure he didn't. I don't know, fall down the stairs or something. While ordering Chinese food for yourself and opening our anniversary wine? Her face went red. We needed to eat, Mom, and Marcus had a stressful week at work. Marcus had a stressful week. Not Quincy, lying upstairs with a fever that could have put him in the hospital. Marcus, who needed wine and takeout to recover from his stressful week. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something that chilled me to the bone. There was no shame in her expression, no guilt, no recognition that she had done anything wrong. Just irritation that I was questioning her. Mom, you're making this into a much bigger deal than it is, she said, her tone shifting to the patient voice she might use with a difficult child. Dad's fine. I took care of him. End of story. But it wasn't the end of the story. As I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of her neglect, I realized that this pattern had been building for years. The missed family dinners with convenient excuses, the phone calls that always seemed to come when she needed something. The way she'd grown distant after her wedding as if marriage had given her permission to stop pretending she cared about anyone but herself. I had told myself it was normal, that adult children get busy with their own lives, that family relationships change and evolve, but this wasn't evolution, this was abandonment. And the most terrifying part was that she didn't even seem to realize it. After Arden and Marcus left that morning, with barely a goodbye to Quincy, I spent the day nursing my husband back to health. By evening, his color had returned and he was able to keep down some soup. But as he grew stronger physically, something else began to emerge. Something that would shatter what remained of my faith in my daughter. "Ethel," Quincy said as I helped him back to bed after dinner, "there's something I need to tell you about this week." The hesitation in his voice made me pause. "What is it, honey?" He settled against his pillows, his eyes avoiding mine. "It's about Arden. About why she was really here." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "She didn't just come to take care of me while you were gone," he said slowly. "She came because she needed money. Again. The word hit me like a physical blow. I sank into the bedside chair, my legs suddenly unsteady. "How much?" $8,000. $8,000. I closed my eyes, trying to process the number. "For what?" "She said Marcus lost his job last month, that they're behind on their mortgage and car payments. She was crying, Ethel. Said they might lose the house." I thought about Marcus's relaxed demeanor the night before, his expensive watch, the designer purse I'd seen Arden carrying. "Did you give it to her?" Quincy's silence was answer enough. "Quincy, she said she'd take care of me while you were gone, that it was the least she could do in exchange for our help. She promised she'd stay by my side, make sure I had everything I needed." The betrayal cut deep, but not just Arden's betrayal. Quincy had given our daughter $8,000 without discussing it with me first. Money we'd been saving for home repairs, for potential medical expenses, for our retirement that was rapidly approaching. When did this conversation happen? Monday morning, about an hour before you left for the airport. Monday morning. She had negotiated payment for caring for her sick father, taken our money, and then abandoned him to play house with her husband. "So she was paid to take care of you," I said, my voice flat. $8,000 to make sure you had your medicine, to monitor your fever, to keep you comfortable. I know how it sounds, but it sounds like she extorted money from her sick father and then didn't hold up her end of the bargain. Quincy flinched at my harsh tone, but I was beyond caring about diplomacy. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that made me physically sick. "Did she ask for the money before or after you told her you were feeling unwell?" Another pause, another damning silence. "Before," he admitted. "She called Sunday night, crying about their situation. I told her I wasn't feeling well, that you were leaving for Portland. She offered to come stay with me." "Offered," I repeated. "Or saw an opportunity." "Ethel, please, she's our daughter." Our daughter. The phrase that had excused so much over the years. Our daughter who had maxed out her credit cards in college and needed us to pay them off. Our daughter who had needed help with her wedding expenses because she'd insisted on a venue they couldn't afford. Our daughter who had borrowed money for various emergencies that never seemed to have clear explanations. "How many times has she asked for money in the past year?" I asked. Quincy shifted uncomfortably. "It doesn't matter." "It does matter. How many times?" "I don't keep track." "Then let me help you remember. There was the car repair in March, $1,500. The medical bill from her emergency room visit in June, $2,200. The credit card payment in August, $3,500. And now this." His face had gone pale. "You've been keeping track." "Someone has to. That's $14,000, Quincy. $14,000 in 8 months. She's struggling. They're young. They're trying to build a life together. She's 32 years old? Marcus is 35. At what point do we stop calling them young and start calling them irresponsible?" But even as I said it, I knew the real issue wasn't their age or their financial struggles. It was the pattern. The way Arden had learned to weaponize our love for her, to turn our parental instincts into an ATM machine. Did she mention anything about looking for work? About Marcus finding a new job? Any kind of plan to improve their situation? Quincy was quiet for a long moment. She said they were working on it. Working on it how? She didn't give specifics. Of course she didn't, because there was no plan. There never was a plan. There was only the expectation that Mom and Dad would continue to solve every problem, fund every crisis, enable every poor decision. And in exchange for this $8,000, I continued, my voice growing colder, she promised to take care of you while you were sick. She tried, Ethel. She brought me crackers. She brought you crackers once, while she and Marcus ate Chinese takeout downstairs. She didn't give you your medication. She didn't monitor your fever. She didn't make sure you were drinking fluids. Maybe she didn't know. She knew, Quincy. She's not stupid. She's selfish. The word hung in the air between us. Harsh and undeniable. Quincy looked like I'd slapped him, but I couldn't take it back. Wouldn't take it back. You could have ended up in the hospital, I continued. A fever that high for that long, in a man your age? You could have had complications. You could have... I couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of losing Quincy because our daughter was too busy enjoying herself to provide the care she'd been paid to give was unbearable. She's always been a little self-centered, Quincy said quietly, as if he were admitting a state secret. But I thought when it really mattered, when I really needed her. His voice trailed off, but I understood. He thought that in a genuine emergency, blood would prove thicker than selfishness. That facing her father's illness would awaken some dormant sense of compassion or duty. Instead, she had seen it as an inconvenience to be managed while she lived it up in our house. There's something else, Quincy said, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart clenched. What else? Tuesday night, when my fever was really high, I was delirious. I called out for help a few times. I remember being really thirsty, but I couldn't make it to the bathroom to get water. I waited, dreading what was coming next. I heard her talking to Marcus in the hallway. She said I was being dramatic. That old people always exaggerate their symptoms to get attention. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Her sick father, burning up with fever, calling for help, and she had dismissed him as attention-seeking. Did she come check on you? Marcus did, eventually. He brought me a glass of water and helped me to the bathroom. He seemed uncomfortable, like he knew it wasn't right. So Marcus, who barely knew us, had shown more compassion for Quincy than our own daughter. The man she'd been entertaining downstairs had been the one to provide basic human decency. I sat in that chair, holding my husband's hand, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't about money anymore. This wasn't about Arden being irresponsible with finances or making poor life choices. This was about character, about the kind of person my daughter had become when she thought no one important was watching. We can't keep doing this, I said finally. Doing what? Enabling her, rescuing her, pretending that this is normal behavior from a grown woman. Quincy squeezed my hand weakly. She's our only child, Ethel. And that's exactly why we've let it go this far. As I helped Quincy settle in for the night, my mind was racing with memories I'd been suppressing for years. The time Arden had missed Quincy's birthday dinner because she'd had a last-minute invitation to a concert. The Christmas she'd shown up 2 hours late because she'd been shopping. The countless phone calls that went unreturned unless she needed something. I had made excuses for all of it. Told myself that different generations showed love differently, that she was busy building her own life, that family relationships naturally evolved as children became adults. But this week had stripped away all my rationalizations. This week had shown me who Arden really was when her father lay suffering and she had to choose between his comfort and her own entertainment. She had chosen herself. She always chose herself. And we had taught her that this was acceptable by never holding her accountable for any of it. The call came 3 days later, just as I was beginning to believe we might have some peace. Quincy was almost fully recovered, sitting in his favorite chair reading the newspaper, when my phone rang with Arden's number. I stared at the screen for several rings before answering. Hi, Mom. Arden's voice was bright and cheerful, as if nothing had happened. How's Dad feeling? Better, I said shortly. Oh, good. I was worried about him. The casual lie slipped from her tongue so easily it made my skin crawl. Listen, I was calling because Marcus and I were thinking of coming by this weekend. Maybe bringing dinner, spending some time with you guys. I could hear it in her voice. The setup. The prelude to another request. What do you need, Arden? Why would you assume I need something? Can't I just want to spend time with my parents? Can you? A pause. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly, becoming more careful. Well, actually, there is one tiny thing. You remember how I told Dad that Marcus lost his job? I remember. Well, it's been harder than we expected to get caught up on everything. The $8,000 Dad gave us helped so much, but we're still struggling with some bills. $8,000 gone in 3 days. I shouldn't have been surprised, but somehow I still was. What kind of bills? I asked. Just the usual stuff. Credit cards, the mortgage, utilities. Adult life is expensive, you know. Adult life. As if Quincy and I had never experienced the challenges of supporting ourselves, paying bills, managing money responsibly. How much are you behind? It's not that much, really. If we could just get help with the mortgage payment this month, $3,200, we'd be able to catch up on everything else. $3,200, on top of the $8,000 she'd already taken. Money she'd been paid to care for her sick father and had instead used to fund her week of entertainment. Arden, we gave you $8,000 5 days ago. I know, Mom, and we're so grateful, but that mostly went to the car payments and credit cards. The mortgage is due Monday, and if we don't pay it, she let the threat hang in the air. The implied consequences. The guilt trip designed to make me feel responsible for their potential homelessness. What did you do with the $8,000? I asked bluntly. I told you. Car payments and credit cards. All of it? A hesitation. Well, we had to eat. And Marcus needed some clothes for job interviews. Clothes for job interviews. I thought about the expensive watch he'd been wearing. The designer labels I'd glimpsed in their overnight bags. How much did interview clothes cost exactly? Mom? Are you still there? I'm here. So, can you help us with the mortgage? Just this once. And then we'll be back on our feet. Just this once. The phrase she'd used every other time she'd asked for money. The promise she'd broken repeatedly over the past year. Let me ask you something, Arden, I said slowly. Do you remember what you were doing Tuesday night? Tuesday? I don't know. Why? You were drinking wine and laughing with Marcus while your father had a fever of over 103 degrees. Mom, we've been through this. I was taking a break. You were taking a break from the job you were paid $8,000 to do. Paid? Her voice rose indignantly. You make it sound like some kind of business transaction. I was helping my family. Were you? Because from where I stand, it looks like you extorted money from your sick father and then abandoned him to entertain your husband. That's not fair. I stayed with Dad. I made sure he was okay. You made sure he was breathing. That's not the same thing as making sure he was okay. Look, Mom, I don't know why you're being so hostile. All I'm asking for is a little help with the mortgage. It's not like you and Dad can't afford it. And there it was. The entitled assumption that had been lurking beneath every conversation, every request, every crisis that somehow became our responsibility to solve. Not like you can't afford it. Actually, Arden, we can't afford it. What do you mean? I mean that we're 64 and 66 years old. We're supposed to be thinking about retirement, not funding our adult daughter's lifestyle. Lifestyle? Her voice was sharp now, defensive. We're struggling, Mom. This isn't about lifestyle. This is about survival. Then maybe you should consider downsizing, getting a smaller place you can actually afford. We shouldn't have to downsize. We work hard. We deserve to live comfortably. Work hard. Marcus had been unemployed for a month, and as far as I knew, Arden hadn't held a steady job since before her wedding. What exactly is your plan for getting back on your feet? I asked. Marcus has some interviews lined up, and I'm looking into some opportunities too. What kind of opportunities? Just different things. The job market is tough right now. Different things. No specifics, no timeline, no actual plan beyond continuing to rely on us as their personal bank account. Arden, your father and I have given you over $14,000 this year. We can't keep doing this. 14,000? She sounded genuinely shocked, as if she'd never added up the numbers herself. That can't be right. It's exactly right. And that doesn't include the money we've spent on gifts, dinners out, gas money for your visits. We've been subsidizing your life for years. Subsidizing? Mom, families help each other. That's what families do. Help goes both ways, Arden. When was the last time you helped us with anything? Silence. When was the last time you offered to help with yard work, or cooking, or any of the things that are getting harder for us as we get older? More silence. When was the last time you called just to check on us, without needing something? That's not. I call. You call when you need money. You visit when you need money. And apparently you'll even agree to care for your sick father if you need money badly enough. That's not true. Isn't it? Because that's exactly what happened this week. You took $8,000 in exchange for caring for Dad, and then you left him alone to suffer while you enjoyed yourself. I did my best. No, you didn't. Your best would have meant checking on him regularly, making sure he took his medicine, monitoring his fever, bringing him food and water and comfort. Instead, you did the absolute minimum required to justify taking our money. You're being incredibly unfair, Mom. Am I? Let me tell you what's unfair, Arden. What's unfair is working your whole life to build a nest egg for retirement, only to watch it drain away funding your adult daughter's poor choices. What's unfair is coming home to find your sick husband neglected while your daughter parties in your living room. What's unfair is being treated like an ATM by the person who's supposed to love you most. I do love you. No, you love what we can do for you. There's a difference. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line, could practically feel her scrambling for the right words to manipulate me back into compliance. Mom, please, we really are desperate here. If we don't make this mortgage payment, then you'll face the consequences of your financial decisions. Like adults do. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. What am I supposed to tell Marcus? What are we supposed to do? You're supposed to figure it out, together, without relying on your aging parents to solve every problem you create. This is ridiculous. You're acting like we're asking for millions of dollars. It's $3,000, Mom. That's nothing to you. $3,000 was nothing to us. The casual dismissal of money that represented weeks of Quincy's work, months of careful budgeting, years of sacrifice and saving. Goodbye, Arden. Mom, wait. I hung up. Quincy looked up from his newspaper, his expression troubled. That was Arden? She wanted $3,000 more dollars. He sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 66 years. What did you tell her? I told her no. For a moment we sat in silence. Then Quincy folded his newspaper and set it aside. She's going to be angry, he said quietly. Good. Maybe anger will motivate her to actually solve her own problems for once. She might not speak to us for a while. I looked at my husband, this good man who had spent decades enabling our daughter's selfishness out of misplaced love and misguided loyalty. Quincy, I said gently, when she does speak to us, it's only to ask for money. When she visits us, it's only when she needs something. When she promises to care for you, she takes our money and abandons you. What exactly are we losing if she stops speaking to us? He didn't answer, but I could see the truth settling over him like a heavy blanket. We weren't losing a daughter. We'd lost her years ago, so gradually that we'd barely noticed. What we were losing now was the illusion that she cared about us as anything more than a source of financial support. And maybe, just maybe, losing that illusion was the first step toward saving ourselves. The silence lasted exactly 6 days. On the 7th day, after I'd refused to give Arden the mortgage money, my phone exploded with messages. Not from Arden directly. That would have been too straightforward. Instead, I received a barrage of texts and calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, all suddenly concerned about our family dynamics. My sister Janet called first. Ethel, I just got off the phone with Arden. She's beside herself. She says you and Quincy have cut her off financially and she might lose her house. That's not exactly accurate, I said calmly, settling into my kitchen chair with a cup of coffee. She says you refused to help with one mortgage payment. One payment, Ethel. How could you let your own daughter become homeless? I took a slow sip of coffee, gathering my patience. Janet, in the past 8 months, we've given Arden over $14,000. The $8,000 we gave her last week was supposed to be in exchange for her caring for Quincy while he was sick. And did she? She left him alone with a dangerous fever while she and Marcus drank our anniversary wine and ordered takeout for themselves. Silence on the other end of the line. She's desperate, Ethel. People make mistakes when they're desperate. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. She chose to take our money and neglect her responsibilities. But surely one more payment would be followed by another request next month, and another the month after that. Janet, at what point does helping become enabling? My sister didn't have an answer for that. The calls continued throughout the day. Arden's cousin Michelle, concerned about our lack of compassion. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who somehow knew about our family troubles. Even Quincy's brother Robert called from Florida, wondering if we were being too hard on Arden during her time of need. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Arden had painted herself as the victim of cruel, unsympathetic parents who had abandoned her in her hour of desperation. She'd shared carefully selected details: the job loss, the mortgage crisis, our refusal to help, while conveniently omitting the $8,000 we'd already provided and her complete failure to honor her agreement. By the third day of calls, I'd had enough. Quincy, I said that evening as we sat down to dinner, we need to make some changes. He looked up from his plate, concern creasing his features. What kind of changes? The kind that will prevent this from happening again. I'd been thinking about it for days, weighing options and consequences. The phone campaign had made one thing crystal clear. Arden wasn't going to accept our boundaries gracefully. She was going to fight them with every manipulation tactic in her arsenal, including turning our extended family against us. I want to change the locks, I said. Quincy's fork paused halfway to his mouth. The locks? Arden has a key to this house. She's used it to come and go as she pleases, to treat our home like her personal retreat center. I want that to stop. But what if there's an emergency? What kind of emergency? She's never been here for our emergencies, Quincy. She wasn't here when you were sick. She's only here when she has emergencies that require our money. He set down his fork, processing this. What else? I want to remove her from our emergency contact lists. At the bank, at our doctor's offices, everywhere. She doesn't need access to information about our finances or our health if she's not going to act responsibly with it. Ethel, I'm not done. I want to change our wills. That got his full attention. Change them how? Right now, everything goes to Arden when we die. The house, our savings, our life insurance. Everything we've worked for our entire lives goes to someone who sees us as nothing more than a funding source. Quincy was quiet for a long moment. What would you want to do instead? I want to set up a trust, something that will provide for our medical care if we need long-term assistance, with the remainder going to charity after we're both gone. Nothing for Arden? Nothing for Arden. The words hung in the air between us, final and irreversible. I watched my husband's face as he absorbed the implications of what I was suggesting. We were talking about cutting our only child out of our inheritance entirely. She'll contest it, he said finally. Let her. We're both of sound mind, and we have every right to leave our money where we choose. She'll be furious. She's already furious. The difference is, this way we won't be enabling her destructive behavior from beyond the grave. Quincy pushed his food around his plate, thinking, You really think this is necessary? I think it's overdue. Quincy, she took $8,000 from us under false pretenses. Money we needed for our own security, our own future. She essentially defrauded her own parents and then abandoned her sick father. What do you think she'd do with a larger inheritance? We both knew the answer to that. She'd blow through it within months, probably less, and then blame us posthumously for not leaving her more. When would you want to do this? Tomorrow. I already called Attorney Morrison's office and made an appointment for 10 a.m. Quincy raised his eyebrows. You've already set this in motion? I have. The only question is whether you're going to support me or fight me on this. He was quiet for so long, I began to worry he would choose his old pattern of enabling Arden over the hard choices we needed to make. Finally, he reached across the table and took my hand. You're right, he said quietly. It's time. The next morning, we sat in Attorney Morrison's office, going through the legal details of restructuring our entire estate plan. It was more complicated than I'd expected, involving trusts and contingencies and beneficiary designations that made my head spin. But the bottom line was simple. Arden would inherit nothing. Are you certain about this? Morrison asked as we reviewed the documents. This is a significant change from your previous will. We're certain, I said firmly. And you understand that this could potentially be contested? We understand. But we also understand that we have the right to leave our assets to whomever we choose. Of course. I just want to make sure you've thought through all the implications. I looked at Quincy, who nodded encouragingly. Mr. Morrison, our daughter has demonstrated repeatedly that she views us as a source of funding rather than as parents deserving of respect and care. We've decided we don't want to reward that behavior, even after we're gone. He nodded and made some notes. Very well. These documents will need to be signed and notarized, and I'd recommend reviewing them again in a year or two to make sure they still reflect your wishes. As we walked out of the attorney's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. It wasn't that I was happy to be cutting Arden out of our will. It broke my heart that it had come to this, but there was relief in finally taking action, in setting boundaries that couldn't be manipulated or circumvented. How do you think she'll react when she finds out? Quincy asked as we drove home. With rage, probably. Maybe she'll threaten to never speak to us again. And if she does? I thought about that for a moment. Then we'll finally have the peace we've been missing for so many years. The locksmith came that afternoon. As I watched him remove Arden's key from our front door and install new deadbolts, I felt like I was reclaiming my own home. For too long, Arden had treated our house as an extension of her own space, coming and going without permission, helping herself to our food and wine, using our guest room whenever it suited her needs. Now it was our sanctuary again. That evening, as we sat in our living room without the constant worry of unexpected visitors or demands for money, Quincy looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. I keep waiting for the phone to ring, he admitted. It probably will. But we don't have to answer it. When do you think we should tell her about the will? We don't. If she asks directly, we can tell her we've made changes, but I see no reason to volunteer information that will only be used to manipulate us. She might find out anyway. Then she'll find out, but it won't change anything. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text message from Arden. I glanced at it, then showed it to Quincy. I hope you're happy. We lost the house. Marcus and I are moving into his parents' basement. Thanks for nothing. Quincy winced. She lost the house. She chose to lose the house, I corrected. She had $8,000 to put toward the mortgage. She chose to spend it on other things. Still, it's hard to read. It was hard. Despite everything, despite her selfishness and manipulation and cruelty, she was still our daughter. But I'd finally learned the difference between love and enablement. I deleted the message without responding. Some lessons I was beginning to understand could only be learned the hard way, and some boundaries, once set, had to be maintained regardless of the emotional cost. Chapter 6. The Deserved Liberation. 8 months passed in blessed silence. 8 months without desperate phone calls in the middle of the night. 8 months without crisis after crisis that somehow required our immediate financial intervention. 8 months without the constant underlying stress of wondering what Arden would need next, what excuse she would manufacture, what guilt trip she would deploy to extract more money from us. For the first time in years, Quincy and I lived for ourselves. We took the cruise to Alaska we'd been postponing for 5 years, always finding reasons why we couldn't afford it or couldn't leave town. We renovated our bathroom with money that would have previously gone to Arden's latest emergency. I joined a book club at the library, something I'd never had time for when my evenings were spent fielding calls from our demanding daughter. Quincy started volunteering at the local animal shelter, coming home with stories about the dogs he walked and the kittens he socialized. His health had fully recovered from the fever incident, and he seemed stronger and more energetic than he'd been in months. "I feel like I've been holding my breath for years," he told me one evening as we sat on our back porch, watching the sunset. "Like I was always waiting for the next crisis, the next request for help." I understood exactly what he meant. The constant state of alert, always ready to rescue, always prepared to sacrifice our own needs and plans for Arden's latest drama. It had been exhausting in ways I hadn't fully realized until it stopped. "Do you miss her?" I asked. He considered the question seriously. "I miss the daughter I thought she was. I miss the relationship I hoped we could have. But the actual Arden, the one who sees us as an ATM and abandons sick family members? No, I don't miss that at all." It was a brutally honest assessment, and it matched my own feelings perfectly. I mourned the loss of the daughter I'd raised, but I didn't miss the woman she'd become. The test of our new boundaries came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in the kitchen, enjoying my coffee and reading the newspaper, when I heard a car door slam in our driveway. Through the window, I saw Arden's red sedan, the one we'd helped her buy 2 years ago, parked behind Quincy's truck. She looked different as she walked toward our front door, thinner, more tired, wearing clothes I didn't recognize and a coat that had seen better days. But her posture was the same, determined, entitled, ready to demand what she wanted. The doorbell rang. I didn't move. It rang again, followed by knocking. "Mom? Dad? I know you're home." I saw Dad's truck. More knocking, more persistent this time. Quincy appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression tense. "Should we answer? Do you want to answer?" He thought about it, then shook his head. "Not really." The knocking continued for another few minutes, then stopped. Through the window, I watched Arden walk around the side of the house, testing doors and windows like a burglar. When she discovered her key no longer worked, she stood in our driveway for a long moment, hands on her hips, clearly frustrated. Then she returned to the front door and began pounding on it with both fists. "Mom! Dad! Open the door! I need to talk to you!" The desperation in her voice was new. In the past, her requests had been delivered with confidence, with the assumption that we would eventually give her what she wanted. This was different. This was panic. "Please, I really need your help this time. Something terrible has happened." Something terrible. The phrase that had opened our wallets so many times before. The magic words that had convinced us to postpone our own needs, to sacrifice our own security, to enable her irresponsibility over and over again. But not anymore. I walked to the front door and spoke through it, my voice calm and clear. "Arden, you need to leave." "Mom, please. Just let me explain. Marcus is in the hospital. He had an accident at work and—" "I'm sorry to hear that, but you still need to leave. I can't handle this alone. The medical bills are going to be enormous, and we don't have insurance, and I don't know what to do." Don't have insurance. Despite Marcus being employed for months now, something we'd learned through mutual acquaintances who'd seen him around town working construction. They'd chosen not to purchase health insurance, another adult decision with adult consequences. "Arden, you made it very clear that you don't need us in your life unless we're providing money. We've chosen to respect that preference." "That's not true. I love you and Dad. I've just been struggling and—" "You've been struggling for 32 years. At some point, struggling becomes a choice." "Mom, please, I'm begging you. I have nowhere else to turn." Begging. The word that would have broken my heart 8 months ago. Now it just made me sad. Not for her situation, but for the fact that it had taken desperation to bring her to our door. "You have 2 options," I said through the door. "You can leave now voluntarily, or I can call the police and have you removed for trespassing." Silence. Then quieter. "You would really call the police on your own daughter?" "I would call the police on anyone who refused to leave my property after being asked." I heard her intake of breath, sharp and shocked. She'd never considered that we might actually enforce boundaries, that our threats might be real rather than empty. Fine, she said finally, her voice thick with tears that might or might not have been genuine. Fine, but don't expect me to come crawling back when you need help someday. The threat was familiar, the suggestion that someday the tables would turn, that we would need her more than she needed us. It had worked for years, playing on our fears of aging, of illness, of being abandoned in our time of need. But we'd already seen what Arden's help looked like. We'd experienced firsthand her version of caregiving. The idea of depending on her for anything important was more terrifying than the prospect of managing without her. "Goodbye, Arden," I said. I heard her footsteps on the porch, then the car door slamming. The engine started, and she drove away with more speed than was probably safe in our quiet neighborhood. Quincy appeared beside me at the window, watching her taillights disappear around the corner. "How do you feel?" he asked. I examined my emotions carefully. Sadness, certainly. Relief, definitely. But also something else. Something I hadn't expected. "Free," I said. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free." That evening, we learned through the neighborhood grapevine that Marcus's accident had been minor, a twisted ankle from stepping in a hole on a construction site. He'd been treated and released from the emergency room the same day. The crisis that had brought Arden to our door in desperation was little more than an inconvenience that would result in a small medical bill. But she'd been willing to use even that minor situation to attempt emotional manipulation, to try to guilt us back into our old patterns of rescue and enablement. "She'll try again," Quincy predicted as we got ready for bed. "Probably, but it gets easier each time." He nodded, understanding what I meant. Each boundary we maintained made the next one easier to enforce. Each time we chose our own well-being over her demands, it became more natural, less fraught with guilt and second-guessing. 6 months later, we received an invitation to Arden's birthday party. It arrived in the mail without any personal note or explanation, as if the past year of silence had never happened. The invitation was for a party at a local restaurant, and it included a registry link for gifts. A registry for a grown woman's birthday party. "Are you going?" Quincy asked after reading it. I considered it briefly, then tossed the invitation in the recycling bin. "No? Are you?" "No." It was that simple. No anguish, no debate, no guilt-ridden phone calls to discuss our decision. We simply chose not to attend an event hosted by someone who had shown us nothing but disrespect and cruelty. Later, we heard through relatives that the party had been sparsely attended. Apparently, Arden's pattern of using people had extended beyond just us, and others had also grown tired of being treated as resources rather than relationships. As I write this, it's been 2 years since that morning when I came home early from my business trip and found my daughter laughing while her father suffered alone. 2 years since I finally acknowledged what Arden had become and made the painful decision to prioritize my own well-being and my husband's dignity over my daughter's endless demands. Those 2 years have been the most peaceful of my adult life. Quincy and I have traveled more, laughed more, slept better, and worried less than we had in decades. Our marriage has strengthened without the constant stress of managing Arden's crises. Our bank account has grown instead of being constantly drained by her emergencies. We've learned to live for ourselves without guilt, to make decisions based on our own needs and desires rather than constantly calculating how they might affect our daughter's opinion of us. Most importantly, we've learned that love doesn't require sacrifice of our own dignity and security. That setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary. That being a good parent sometimes means refusing to rescue your child from the consequences of their own choices. I don't know what the future holds for Arden. I hope she eventually learns to take responsibility for her own life, to build real relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial exploitation. But her growth or lack thereof is no longer my responsibility. My responsibility now is to myself, to my husband, and to the peaceful life we've finally claimed for ourselves. And for the first time in years, that feels like enough. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.